I think you have to go through the ups and downs before you can really appreciate what's to come, if that makes sense. It not only keeps you hungry, humble, but also it makes you work a lot harder and smarter. Welcome to the Yes, You Can podcast. My name is Eugene Chan. I am the founder of EuCan Productions, and I'll be your host. In this podcast, we try to inspire you to change your mindset from you can't to you can. Joining us today, we have my partner in crime, Kitty.
Hi everyone, I'm Kitty. Really happy to be here and join Eugene on his second episode of this very amazing podcast. And I'll be asking him some questions and trying to see to push the story a little further.
So in this second episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about my personal finance, how we sort of began our funding, going from minimal equipment, not having much money, to starting our production company and billing over $1 million. Let's start off by talking about how I began in high school, actually. So if you listen to our first podcast, you would have remembered that I began my passion in photography and drama, therefore filmmaking, in around year 10, year 11. So that's my IGCSE and my IB. So back then, I think we had a photo camera, a Canon 450D and and then eventually a Canon 60D. I don't come from a wealthy family. I went to an international school, but it was not one of those well-known international schools. It wasn't a ESF. It wasn't a big international school. It was a half local, half international school, actually. So the fees were relatively lower, but still more expensive. So I'm still fortunate. But I was lucky enough to get a scholarship starting year 12 that helped sort of pay for my tuition. And because I didn't come from a particularly wealthy background, I didn't get the opportunity to have lots of equipment. So when we go on set these days, or when we go filming and we tell them that when a client asks, they'll be like, oh, so where do you rent your equipment? We'll tell them we own the equipment because we go on so many shoots, it makes more sense to own the equipment. And they'll be like, wow, you must be rich. But it didn't start off that way. In the beginning, we only had like one camera and like a really bad tripod with no lights or like a really bad mic as well. So after high school, I wanted to do film school. I wanted to go to study film in university, but I couldn't. It was expensive. And at the same time, I was offered a full scholarship at HKUST, and that sort of pushed me towards doing engineering of all things. And because my parents are Asian, but mainly because it helped ease the financial load off my parents, so they didn't have to pay for my tuition after I have graduated high school. So after that, I didn't want to rely on my parents anymore. So I became financially independent when I was 18 years old, or just around when I graduate high school. And how do you afford equipment, pay for your living expenses, pay for dormitory, your hall? How do you balance all that? How do you get the equipment? How do you survive, after just graduating high school? So here's what we did. So tuition was covered. Fantastic. Didn't have to worry about paying for school. Because in my high school, I was a relatively top scorer. I was also the head boy, so I had okay, recognition. So my peers, my juniors would find me and they'll be like, can you tutor me in English or physics or mathematics? I'll be like, yeah, sure. And that's actually how it all began. I started tutoring multiple kids. I think we had 3 kids at once, tutoring at around $300-$400 an hour every week. And then I also had a class that I was teaching at my old high school. They offered me a teaching class. So that's how I sort of survived my first initial year of university. And that's how I managed to gain money, equity, finance for my first camera, like first video camera. I think it was a 60D or 5D Mark II second hand. And then mics and whatnot, very little stuff. But basically I tutored every single week, multiple kids, multiple classes to make enough money to survive on campus as well as have money for equipment. And of course, we were all university students. We tried to save as much money as we can, eat breakfast and dinner, maybe skip lunch sometimes, or have the afternoon tea set. If you're HKUST, you'll know that LG7 is cheaper than LG1, so you go LG7, save a few dollars. And never go to LSK. LSK food is expensive. And then afterwards, once I've gained the equipment, I always made short films. Every few months, I'll make a short film just for fun with my friends. Adrian Dryden, who's an actor now. Charles, who's helped me on shoots and whatnot. So we'll make short films, and then it'll be really fun. And then eventually, in around end of year 1 in university or year 2, a startup saw my short films. It was a startup in my university, and they went like, "Hey, I've seen your films. I like your storytelling. Would you like to shoot a promotional video?" And at that time, I think I asked them for their budget. I didn't know anything at the time. I didn't know anything about budgeting or pricing. It was around 2,000 Hong Kong dollars, 3,000 Hong Kong dollars. Minuscule. And it was so much work. But it was a starting point. And from there, people realized that I do more than short films. And one of my high school friends' mom owns a travel agency, and she needed to do a overseas pre-wedding photo shoot, and asked if I wanted to fly to Italy to shoot this mini commercial. And I said, yeah, Italy, why not? Venice, Milan. It was a good deal. So I said yes. The only catch was, I think it was 2 to 4 weeks in the middle of semester. And that's where I had my midterms and my exams and my assignments. So I told one of my Professor Ravi, product design, I told him about the opportunity, and he said, "That's some rare opportunity, and I see something in you." He didn't say those exact words, but that's what he meant, I think. You should go pursue it. I'll pass your midterm. We'll figure something out. Just talk to me after you come back. I know you're on the right path. Just go. And then he said in such a genuine and real manner. He believed in me. So off I went. I shot that commercial. It was, if you're interested, I shot on 5D Mark II again on like a prime lens. But that commercial paid 30 to 50,000 Hong Kong dollars, I think. But I was there for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And all expenses were covered, plane ticket, hotel, and whatnot. So it was a really great opportunity. It was a really close friend of mine's mom again. So really grateful for that opportunity. And that was one of the biggest projects at the time that I've done. And it was incredible. Like I was just a kid making short films at my university. And then all of a sudden I get to travel to Italy and make this film. So it was an incredible opportunity. So after that, someone else saw that video and the other projects that we've done at the time. And HKUST, my university, asked me, "Hey, we like your storytelling. Would you like to make our recruitment videos?" And I said yes. But at that time, in order to make that money, in order to build them as a client, I have to register as a formal business. And that's what we did. And for that project, I think it was around a month long. It was also around $30-something thousand, shooting a series of promotional undergraduate videos in my year 2. So you can see, like, I'm starting to make a little bit more money. I was still tutoring, but ultimately I managed to make enough from these projects to stop tutoring and still survive and invest more in my equipment. I think that's when I bought the I think shortly after the UST one, shoots, I bought the Canon C100 Mark I. That's our first cinema camera. And then we also got a few more tiny lights here and there, but nothing major as of yet. So after that, I kept making short films and promo videos and some spec ads too. And then a relatively famous YouTube channel, Digital Rev, was looking for a new presenter, a new person who can talk about cameras and photography. And I reached out, and ultimately they liked my personality and my tone and all that. And they hired me to be their presenter and filmmaker for their YouTube channel. And that gave me a steady income every month to make not that much. I think it was under 10K a month, depending on the projects that we had. But I was living in dormitory. My halls were like $7,000 for half a year. It's not expensive. So that gave me a steady income as well as good exposure to a lot of different brands. And even when I went on my exchange, I kept filming for them in the UK. I went to the University of Warwick for exchange. And they let me keep... I kept doing reviews and videos for them in the UK. And we even collaborated with Sony there. And that kept paying my university bills, my travel bills, my exchange. And that brings me to my second point, is the fact that UST is actually a very supportive university. They've given me so much scholarship to support me as a filmmaker, as a creative individual. Exchange, because of my scholarship, they gave me, I forgot how much they gave me for exchange. I think it was 30,000 Hong Kong dollars. But aside from that, they also gave me a diversity scholarship, which was like $60,000. And then the Li Ka-shing Creative Leadership Fund that they also, pushed me for was another $50,000 Hong Kong. And that kept me going for a while. Even when I didn't have as many clients, I didn't have to go back to tutoring. And that I could still manage to eat and pay for the halls and keep making short films I enjoyed. So that kept going on for a while. After that, I graduated university. But just before that, I joined a little startup, an education startup called Learning Time. They were looking for a filmmaker to make educational videos. And I thought, sounds interesting. I like education. I like making films. Maybe it's an interesting company to join for a while. So I did part-time there for a while in my final year, and then as well as a little bit after I've graduated. So you'll notice that while we began our EuCan productions in year 2, we kept doing other projects that were not related to keep it going because it was hard finding consistent clients. So I stayed at Learning Time for a while, great community, great people, and I met great friends there. But ultimately, it was time to move on. And right before COVID was when I decided to cut everything off to go EuCan full-time, to really pursue this. And that was actually the same year, or a few years, I think a year before, where I moved out. So I moved out to my own apartment when I was around 22. I think it was 22. And at that point, I had the part-time at Learning Time, and then I also had like a few clients that, like a few agencies that found me or my company to film separate projects in Hong Kong and Singapore and whatnot. But ultimately, it was time to sort of do my own thing. And then I moved out, and then for a year, and then I had my own clients. But then COVID hit, and protests hit. And it was kind of scary because having moved out, you're paying actual rent now. It's not like you're living in hall in university. Having that fixed monthly cost. And then with COVID and protests and all that, most of my clients canceled. It was very uncertain at that point. You didn't know when the next project was coming in. They all canceled. And I had to really start budgeting myself to make sure that I had enough runway to survive. I think it was 6 months into the not protest, 6 months into COVID. Money was running a little bit dry. I was a little bit scared that I won't make rent. So I had to take up a part-time or a job at a local media agency for a month to make ends meet, because I was actually quite worried about not being able to pay rent. My roommates would cover me, obviously, but I didn't want to rely on that. So I had to do something. It was a little bit scary. Luckily, after a month, some of my university friends that are now working at major companies like Microsoft, and some new people at companies like Steelcase and Alibaba and all that, they reached out and they went like, "Hey, I want to recommend you. I want to refer you to shoot this project for Steelcase," or another friend will be like, "Hey, I'm working at Microsoft now. We saw the video that you did last year. Would you be interested in doing another project with us?" And when companies started realizing it was time for a digital transformation, that offline events might never come back or become the same as they used to be, they contacted me to make videos that connect with people, because I believe we make more than just videos. We tell stories, we connect with people with an objective. So it goes beyond just pointing a camera at something. We want to tell a story, we want to connect with our audience, we want to achieve a particular goal. And that's when clients start coming back in, and money started coming back in, and I managed to make my first hire, Justin. Best decision ever. But before that, we had Zioen, my roommate, who helped me out on shoots, and Yanis, who I met at Learning Time, at the education startup, who helped me throughout. And I think you have to go through the ups and downs before you can really appreciate what's to come, if that makes sense. It not only keeps you hungry, humble, but also it makes you work a lot harder and a lot more smarter, and it helps you sort of make the right investments in your time and your resources, what equipment to buy, what you should invest your time in. I spent a lot of time learning how to run a business from Christo. He runs an educational company called The Future, and it's really going beyond learning about videography. It's about connecting with people. I mean, for example, the Steelcase, Microsoft, and UST projects all came from knowing people and helping them before without expecting anything. It's about being genuine and authentic and trying to make a difference, and always believe in, that's part of the EuCan spirit. It's always, if someone asks me, "Can you do this?" I'll be like, "Yes, you can." It goes beyond the money. The money will come and it will go, and it's okay. I think I covered a lot of big milestones in my life, and lots of financial knowledge. My financial background as well. Is there anything I missed, Kitty, or anything in particular you think you want to fill the audience in?
Yeah, so here actually I wanted to go back to what you mentioned earlier on the beginning of your story in high school, and in university. When you went on the Italy shoot, you mentioned that you had you had this difficult situation where we were presented with an amazing opportunity, but you had to say no to something else. Essentially, in midterms was one of the challenges. So I want to ask if you have any advice for people who are shy to take these opportunities, and how to know when to say yes, when to say no, and when to ask people for help in order to support you to say yes. For instance, in this situation, it would be to ask the professor.
So I think that was quite a big question. I'm just going to break it down in bite-sized pieces, and then you can ask the question again. But essentially, I think your main question just now was, when do you say yes and when do you say no? I think for the most part, it's developed into like a gut feeling. If it feels right, you go for it. But that's such a fluffy answer, so I'm going to give you something a little bit more in depth. Here's the truth. If you haven't had a client for a long time and you need money, you're hungry, then you need to say yes. That's the honest truth. If you need to pay rent, if you need to make ends meet, then you need to say yes. You have no choice. That's why when you're not in a vulnerable situation, when you have enough runway, enough income, enough clients, that's when you have the opportunity to say no. And having the ability to say no gives you so much more power when you say yes. It allows you to take on bigger projects because you can say no to the smaller ones. But if we're referring back to my very beginning, how do I determine whether or not to skip a midterm or skip an exam and ask the teacher? It's about being honest, and being proud of who you are. Because I think maybe some people might be ashamed that if they were studying engineering and they had this film opportunity, they might be like, oh, what will my engineering professor think of me if I'm going to go take some videos or photos, right? And skip a midterm. I think you also have to have faith in the people that you're around. I believed in the professor, that he saw something in me. So that's why I was really honest with what I was going to do. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, essentially what I was trying to get at was knowing when to ask for help. And I think in that situation, it was a very, very good call for you to be honest with your professor. And definitely that was a life-changing experience. So my next question is about, you mentioned earlier, okay, you started from a small camera, then you very slowly built up after getting several clients. But obviously buying cameras are still expensive. And I know that you buy secondhand. So I was wondering if you have any advice for people on how to pick the right cameras to buy based on your budget and how to find the best deals for what you need. And anything related to buying equipment, but being smart with the prices.
I'm going to have to start off with the most important answer that you've definitely heard. It doesn't matter what you shoot on. It really doesn't. It's if you haven't, even iPhones these days create incredible images, but first of all, I would try to make do with what you have, because what you have is probably good enough. To give you an example, I was shooting a Steelcase advertisement. Steelcase is a high-end furniture company. And I was just there to shoot a Christmas photo shoot for one of their chairs. And very last minute, we had to shoot a short 15-second ad as well for them. And I was on a 6D Mark I, Canon 6D Mark I, and I had to shoot slow motion. If you know that camera, you'll know that in slow motion, it only shoots 720p. Whereas all my other projects were in 4K and in shooting in log and all that. 6D Mark I could not do that. It didn't have a long profile. It wasn't a video camera. It was a photo camera with some video features. But up till this day, it's still a project that a lot of people compliment us about, with the set design and the lighting and everything. So it's about making do with what you have, not necessarily craving new equipment, because new equipment comes out every single few months. And really, if you have the creative know-how and you know the objective of the client, what they're trying to accomplish, that's more important than getting the equipment, right? But if you have to get new equipment, I think in the first few years of filmmaking, most of our new equipment was from, so we're in Hong Kong, was either from Carousel or DC Fever. They sell secondhand cameras online. And it was significantly cheaper. If you can find a good deal, 50% off. I think I bought my first C200 for 60% off, and it came with extra batteries and a cage and lots of accessories, CFast cards. So if you can, buy secondhand. No one's going to notice the difference, especially when you're shooting on higher end equipment. You don't have to worry about it being fake, because there's no fake RE Sky panels or fake C300. And just be careful. Just check the equipment, check the reviews. But aside from that, there's nothing wrong with getting secondhand equipment.
So you mentioned Carousel and DC Fever. I was wondering if there's any other great websites you have out there that you think would be great to recommend to other, fellow filmmakers who you think, especially in Hong Kong, which are great platforms to find secondhand or to check prices, for instance.
I think if you're buying secondhand, there's no better website than Carousel or DC Fever. If you're looking to compare prices of brand new products, price.com.hk, great job. If you're buying something new, if you're not local enough, there's like two types of pricing on price.com.hk. There's like Surfo and there's Hongfo, which basically means with warranty and without, because the without warranty is from overseas, whereas with warranty is a local supplier. So sometimes it might be like 5% cheaper, but if you're buying like a C300 Mark III, 5% of $90,000 is quite a lot. So there's that.
Cool. I think that's really helpful information. Somewhat related to that, we're talking about budgeting, buying secondhand. But what about, you mentioned your story before on a really low time in your life when money was short. How would you can share your experience or what you, like looking back, what you think you should have done. But what advice do you have on budgeting through tough times in terms of the split between your spending, saving, investment, and how does that compare to, for instance, in a very good time or regular, during the peaks and the troughs, how do you change the way you save, invest, spend, and make sure that you always have enough for those tough times?
Okay. I think first off, it's important to remind you, I didn't come from a wealthy background, so to drop low was just going back to my where I was in the very beginning. I mean, for example, a lot of people don't know this, but I didn't have my first Starbucks until I was like 16, 17, and then my friends took me after school or after a hangout, and they're like, let's go to the Starbucks. I'm like, what is a Starbucks? It looks so expensive. $40 for coffee? Jesus. So I didn't have that luxury until I was quite old, until I was like 16, 17. Before that, it was a lot of like just home cooked meals and like the cheapest meals you can find. I'm talking about like local restaurants with no names on the sign. It's like just like really cheap Tatan Tang or something like. But I was happy. I never complained. I'm not a complainer. And if you know me, I love whatever it is that's available to me and make the most out of it. So that is an important mindset that you have to develop, regardless of whether or not you have money. If you have the mindset that you have to make do with what you have, and not just make do, be happy with what you have, because that's what's given to you, and you can work harder for it, but be happy with where you are. And if you don't like where you are, just change it and do something about it. When times did get tough, after a while, I was very, very specific about what I spent. Every single dollar I spent is on an Excel sheet. Even now, every single dollar, MTR, my lunch, groceries, anything I pay with my octopus, everything is on a really tightly packed Excel sheet, breaking down everything that I've spent, and then I'll look back every month, making sure that I'm not overspending, that it's always around the same amount. And in terms of investment, I like to invest around 20% of my income, and I don't touch that investment. So I invest S&P 500 mostly, and I never touch my investments. Even when times got really rough, I'd never touched it because I knew compound interest and stock growth, I needed to keep my hands off, and it was important to stay disciplined. It's about saving, and if you don't need something, if something's a luxury, you don't really need it. I'm not a very materialistic guy. If you know me, the most I spend on is food. I love eating and anything that can save me time. So if I have a meeting to go to, or I'm feeling really exhausted, I'll take a cab, I'll take an Uber. That's what I spend on. And it's exchanging your money for time. And for, in my case, my stomach. I love food. It's about realizing that you don't need materialistic goods to prove yourself to anyone else. Yeah.
So I really like that you touched on the Excel part, because that's always something that I've really admired about you, how well and how diligently you track your expenses. But let's say someone like me who is more lazy and doesn't want to track everything on an Excel. I know that you have lots of advice on this. So how would you recommend for whether it be business owners, whether it just be, regular people, how to best track your personal finances, why it is important to track your finances, and what tools would you recommend that are out there?
Okay. So I used to use like an app on my phone to track expenses, and the FreshBook to track business expenses and invoices and whatnot. We still somewhat do, but for my personal finance, I literally have a Google sheet with like one column for the name of the expense and one column for the actual expense amount, because with the apps and all that, it's very nice. There's lots of great UIs and like, you can press, this is for groceries, this is for transportation, this is for that. But it's creating so much barrier of entry. You have to click so many times to input a spending. And I think if you want to track expenses, personal expenses, you have to limit your barrier of entry. That's why with Google Sheet, I literally click on the sheet, enter my lunch, the amount, and I'm done. I don't have to. You can take a photo of your receipt, and then you can also do a lot of things. But personally, for just tracking my money and where it's going, I type what it is that I spent it on, the amount, and that's it. Because that's the simplest way to input money and what you spent it on. And Google Sheets tracks when you enter that amount. So I know that it's on that day that I've spent X amount of dollars on lunch. So while apps and different softwares are great, if you're busy, if you're lazy, I think Google Sheets are a very simple and free way to track your finances.
Yep. I think that's a very you way. Maybe just for the audience on a little side note here, I think apps would be great for people who really like to see charts as well. I know you can do that on Google Sheets, but on apps, like, just with a click of a button, you can see your division of spending on various, whether it be food, probably for you is a large chunk, transportation, or whatever it is. So moving on to my next question. It's also related to kind of the tough times, but from more of a recent situation. I know that you have been in a time where cash flow is a little bit tight because clients are not paying on time. So I wonder if you have any advice on managing around these times, and also if you really need the money soon and the client it's not your fault, it's because they are just paying late. They already agreed to pay you earlier, but they just haven't done it. How do you politely but assertively ask for it so that you are taking yourself out of this difficult situation and not getting stepped all over?
So depending on the type of client you're working with, for example, if you're working with the bigger clients, a lot of the bigger clients have a policy, and it's something called, like, for example, a 60 net, meaning they will pay you in 60 days after the delivery of your project. And that's true of a lot of our clients, whether it be Microsoft or AWS or even Steelcase. They have a net policy where it's like 30 net, 60 net. They pay you from that date of delivery. And so, I mean, one of our projects, for example, began in January, and it was an expensive project, a very big project. Began in January, and it ended in May. And because it was a 60 net, so it was 2 months after May. So it was around July when we finally got paid for that project. So you can imagine you have to have a lot of capital ready to pay for, the equipment, the crew, the software, any expenses for that particular project before you even get paid a single dollar. Now that's for the big clients. And for big clients, you just have to have the runway because they expect you to be able to afford it. And if big enough clients come to you, you should already have a pool of runway to use. But if we scale down to if you're filming for an agency as a freelancer, if you're filming for a smaller business, always take 50% upfront. 50%. And that's before you go shoot, right? You can go to your pre-production meetings and discovery meetings, but before you film, because you have to rent equipment before you hire people, take 50%. And most of them will understand because they're business owners as well. They know you need resources, but take 50%. If they don't, depends how much you trust them, but I would recommend you always take 50%. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have time for one more.
Yeah. So guess this will be my last question, and then feel free to just throw in anything else that you want to add. But it's a little bit more on the business expense side. You mentioned always needing to be capital ready if you have a big client. But how do you, I guess one thing that business owners struggle with is also how much how they allocate their business expenses and how much they want to pay themselves. Mm-hmm. So this is crossing over the line of personal finances as well. But how do you decide how much you want to pay yourself as a business owner? And if you want to touch on it as well, how much to allocate to your staff? Because I know how well you treat your staff.
I think that question goes off topic from this episode just a little bit, because we're talking more about sort of personal finance and how you go from point A to point B from a filmmaker to studio in terms of the financial perspective. But to touch on it briefly, a wise business person would pay themselves the amount that it would cost to hire someone to replace them. So that way you account for profit if you didn't have to work in your business, so you can work on your business. But obviously it's not always like that. So I don't do that at the moment. In terms of what I pay my team, I like to think I'm a generous boss. I like to ask them, I will always ask them what they would like. I'll ask them not just the financial amount, I'll ask them what they want to get out of this, right? Because again, jumping back into my point, I think it goes beyond the money. So I'll ask them how much they want, and I'll normally respect that. And if I can, I'll pay that amount. But I'll ask them what they want to learn, what they want to accomplish, right? Maybe they actually want to direct a music video, but they haven't had the opportunity, or maybe they always wanted to try this type of animation, but they don't get the chance to. So I want to give them that opportunity that goes beyond money, that learning opportunity, the experience, exposure, and the self-development, if you will. Yeah. So I think that's it for this episode. I'm not sure how long we've been talking for. I think around half an hour, maybe a bit longer. But yeah, again, this episode talks mostly about my financial background and how I came from practically nothing and became a self-made entrepreneur running a studio. Of course, there's only so much we can go into, and there's only so much I remember. But yeah, I'd love to share more in future episodes. And remember, you always can. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.